Hello and welcome to this virtual event about equality for women in cycling, hosted by Kingston Wheelers. I'm Jasmijn Muller. I've been a member of Kingston Wheelers for 9 years and 10 months to be exact. Kingston Wheelers have been going for a lot longer, since 1924, and it's become one of the bigger clubs in London with more than 500 members. We've got recreational members, got members who are competing as well in all styles of cycling. As a club, we made a pledge that we really want to strive for more equality in our membership base. We're nowhere near, but we hope to have 50-50 membership one day. And also made a pledge to have more diversity in our membership. Again, nowhere near, but we're striving to reflect at least 33% of British and Asian minority ethnic groups that we see in the borough of Kingston, to also have that in club. In the meantime, there's a number of things that we do as a club in a small way. When we organize events, we have 50% entries for women, and also equal prize money for women, both in time trial categories and road bike categories. For example, at our next event that will be on the 18th of April on the Sporting 14 course near Ripley. But that's enough about Kingston Wheelers. Time to introduce our panel tonight to you. So we've got 5 amazing speakers. We've got Ashleigh Moolman Pasio, who's a professional cyclist for Team SD Works. We've got Tiffany Fletcher, who's a talent development coach for British Cycling. We've got Alice Thomson, who's a member of the EPIC group, which stands for Equality and Parity in Cycling. We have Helen Bridgman, who in 2019 joined the InternationElles in riding the whole of the Tour de France one day ahead of the pro peloton. And we've got Jenni Gwiazdowski, who's amongst others chair of the Women of Colour Cycling Collective. So before we go and speak to each of these people, any questions you have, please put them in Facebook Live as we're going along. And if it's a question for a particular person, then put the name with it as well. So starting with Jenni, just going to do a little bit bigger introduction about you, Jenni, because there's a lot of facets to touch upon. So you are originally from California, if I'm not wrong. Like me, you've been in London for over a decade.
Oh yeah, I think 13 years now.
Exactly, time goes quick. You've got a Polish father and a Japanese mother. And since you came to London, you set up London Bike Kitchen, which is an amazing workspace where you've taught many people how to fix their own bikes, including me. And in that way, it's about education, it's about empowerment, but it's also about having fun. And perhaps the nights that you organize specifically for women and other gender variants, the WAG nights, are a really good example of doing it in a fun way. What else to say about you? You wrote a book, How to Build a Bike.
I don't have a copy handy, but it's around.
You're running a really funny podcast called the Wheel Suckers Podcast, together with Alex Davis from Look Mum No Hands. But most important, of course, you are the chair of the Women of Colour Cycling Collective. I'm going to start with a really ignorant and stupid question, but I feel that it is important to ask nonetheless. But what is a woman of colour?
I mean, that's a difficult question because that turn of phrase is it's relatively new. We use a definition to help us describe what this means as those who descended from through one or more parents anywhere in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, indigenous peoples of Australasia, the Americas, the islands, the Atlantic, Indian Pacific, and Roman, Sinti, and travelers. And we explicitly welcome and invite mixed heritage people as well. So technically that's the global majority, and that's another term as well.
Yeah.
But seeing as how we're in the UK, we fall under BAME, the Black and Minority Ethnic Groups. It's kind of a self-identifying thing. We welcome people who have had the experiences of, I mean, like, it's funny for me because if you look at my skin color, I'm basically white, but because of my features, I have experienced racism since I was 5 years old. Like, I remember my first experience when I was 5, and through those experiences, I'm able to like empathize with, you know, other people of color who have had these types of things happen to them, and realize that you need like a support group, and it's not meant to segregate in like a mean way. I don't know. I don't know if I have the right words for that. I call it positive segregation. And again, if people want to identify with this group and want to take up the cause, then by all means, you know, but that's how we define women of color in our group.
And in a cycling context, why do you think that perhaps we don't see that many women of color in cycling yet? What are the barriers?
Where do we begin? For some people, it's actively discouraged. So they come from cultures where cycling is not allowed, period. There are cultural factors where cycling is seen as that's what poor people do. And so we don't ride bikes. And or the opposite, like that's what white people do, so we don't ride bikes. And so there's also money is a barrier, having access to a safe place to learn how to ride a bike. Some people never learned when they were young. People in our group have started learning how to ride a bike when they were 40. So there's all sorts of things that, like, I was lucky. I learned when I was little. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, so my dad was able to teach us. But I am not, you know, a lot of people in our group are not so lucky. And so we're trying to create those opportunities where people can safely ride, safely learn how to ride a bike, see people who look like them and think, this is also for me. So there's that psychological barrier of thinking like, my friends don't ride a bike. Why am I going to ride a bike? And we all know like how amazing cycling is. So it's like trying to get rid of that psychological barrier of saying, this is for you. This is absolutely for you. And you should come and join us and give it a go.
Yeah. Can you describe a little bit more what the collective is and why it was set up as a collective?
We actually started out it was November 2018, our first meeting at Locomotive Hands. And prior to this, we had hosted Aisha McGowan in London, I think twice, and just kind of talking on the off chance about like, oh, is there a Black Girls Do Bike in the UK or something like that, you know? And she was like, no, I have searched and there isn't anything like that. And it was kind of like, and I remember asking Jules, I was like, hey, maybe or Jules Walker. So we were chatting with Aisha. I was like, maybe you should set one up. And she's like, no, because this is work, you know, creating a hub is work. I'm sure all of you know, like when you gather people around, it's not a natural thing. Like you have to provide guidance, you have to nurture. But there was a Galdem article that came out saying, where are all the Black people at Ride London? And this woman wrote an article saying she felt really like an alien, and was just asking questions. And I was like, you know what, I've got an answer. I'll set something up. I will because it was really funny also, like prior to then, I never really identified as a woman of color. I never really saw myself in that aspect. And then reading about other people's experiences, I was like, oh, wait, I have had these experiences myself. And I can use my position of power, all my connections that I've got with the bike industry to create a space where, I mean, it's the same thing I did with the women and gender variant nights. It was never meant to take over and be like, this is a group that's exclusively for women and gender variant people, and we're never going to let men come in, and we're going to be better than the men. And it was a stepping stone, right? Because most women are not encouraged to use tools growing up. And to be honest, a lot of guys now are not encouraged to use tools growing up. And that's why London Bike Kitchen works, right? It's an open workshop. You're there to learn, ask questions, take classes. And so the WAG nights were a stepping stone, like an extra step for people who really were never encouraged to try bike maintenance. And then similarly, at the time, it was the Women of Color Cycling Group London, was just a social thing. It was just a group for people to get together and talk and share tips. And we just met once a month at Look Mum No Hands. And then COVID hit. So that was like 2019 was just really casual. 2019 with COVID, 2020 with COVID meant that we couldn't meet anymore. So we ended up taking everything online and ended up going national because of it. So it's kind of this bonus. It was a good thing. And our group of like maybe 20 people expanded to over 100 at that point. And the Black Lives Matter movement like galvanized us at that point when, for me, it was Ahmaud Arbery getting shot when he was out jogging. Like, you're just out going exercising. You should not have to think about someone coming, just shooting you for no reason. And it really affected people in our group. And we thought, well, we're a support group. If anything, you have to apply to become a member. It's free. And people can, it's a talk, it's a safe space. So we provide an environment where people can talk about these issues, but also a lot of joy sharing. Like, it's become one of our main motivating factors for the group, is to share all the amazing things that people are trying for the first time. I should say that we also decided to become a charity last year. So we formed a working group and we applied to become a charity. And I'm proud to say that officially we are now a charitable incorporated organization. That it's really hard we went back and forth with the charity commission like 4 times, application after application, and we got there though. And really great group of people at the helm helping me. So it's been a whirlwind of a journey, and I'm kind of still shocked that we're here, but it's amazing.
Well, congratulations on getting your charity status. So now that you've got that, what do you hope that will enable you to do? What are your plans for the future, and also how can people get involved?
I think our work is now twofold. So part of it is internal, where we are nurturing and supporting the riders that are coming in, people that want to learn how to ride a bike. In the first place, some people are wanting to train up as cycle trainers. I want to get more people trained up as mechanics. That's my selfish desire. So there's this kind of nurturing aspect where we've got a pilot program starting soon with training up a couple people to become British cycling like certified coaches. Because again, the idea is that we're trying to help change the structures of how people get into cycling, and racing is one of those aspects. So we want more coaches of color to then motivate more people of color to try racing, for example. So things like that, creating pilot programs for more cycle trainers, more mechanics, basically bring more people of color into positions of power, because it's only a good thing. I think the danger is that people often view it as, oh, well, then I'm going to lose something here. Like, that's a spot that's been taken away from me. But that's that scarcity mindset. You know, the old joke of there's a banker, a worker, and a migrant worker or something like that. And the banker's got all, 9 cookies and there's 1 cookie left. Yeah. And he tells the worker, oh, that refugee is going to take your cookie. And it's like, that is false thinking. Like, don't fall for that. You can create, our minds are limitless. You can create ideas for projects out of your head. I created LBK out of nothing. Like, I made a new thing, and it's not taken away anything from anyone. And that's the same idea here. Like, the goal is to get more people riding bikes. So we're going to create more opportunities to make that happen. So that's like the internal thing for the future. And then externally, I think we're going to be doing a lot more advocacy, maybe even some like diversity training. Like, we've got a real amazing spread of people in our working group who are like professionals in their areas of work, and definitely want to be able to let them spread their wings, spread the word, get people to think about their structures differently, and try to change the way things have been working. Because I don't think anyone here agrees that the status quo is okay. Like, things need to change.
No. I think that's why we're all here tonight. I think we all agree that the status quo is not okay.
Yeah.
And we need to change at all levels.
Yeah.
And I very much agree with you. I want to see more female coaches, more women of color as riders, as racers, as coaches, as like yourself, people running bike shops, within the cycle industry and at all levels. I wish you best of luck.
Thank you.
With the collective.
Can I do a plug for, like, come follow us? We're at WCCC_UK on Twitter and Instagram. And I think we've got a Facebook page as well. And then we've got a new website finally, which is womenofcolorcycling.org. And we finally got a bank account. That one took us, I think, 6 months because of like COVID. They didn't want to give out bank accounts. So, but we will be able to take donations soon, and we're looking for like people who want to sponsor our kit, that kind of thing. So just putting that word out there. Yeah,
very welcome to do any plugs you want. I'm going to move over to the next speaker, just being aware of time, which is Alice. Alice Thomson. I think I met you for the very first time in a kitchen in Buxton in summer of 2019, when we were both setting out as a group of 10 women to ride 600 kilometers in the Peak District, basically every bloody hill in the Peak District in one ride, which for me was like my biggest, scariest thing ever. And you were just loving your hills and looking forward to it. So a little bit of an introduction to Alice. She loves hills, whether they're long challenges like the Pure Peak Greats where we met, or short challenges like the many British hill climbs that you've done. You're a member, but also women's officer for Bristol South Cycling Club. And after just 1 year of cycling, I'm not sure if I got that wrong, but definitely not much more than a year, she was the holder of the Everesting world record before any of the pro women then sneaked it away from her. But amazing achievement. But why you're here tonight is because you're a member of the EPIC group, which stands for Equality and Parity in Cycling. But maybe you want to tell us a little bit more, other than what the abbreviation stands for. What is EPIC, and why was it created?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the nice intro, Jazz. So EPIC, as Jazz said, we're kind of like the new kid on the block. We formed following the hill climb season this year. It stands for Equality and Parity in Cycling, and we're trying to basically push for change in amateur competitive cycling, to make it more equal for women. And I think like there were kind of quite a few of us in this circle who'd been like sort of pushing away at the issue for quite a long time, but not really getting anywhere. And then kind of similar to Jenni, like the pandemic and everything being online, people were like sharing their stories way more on social media, and those of us who were like motivated to try and do something about this kind of found each other, blogged together, and then there was the open letter for change, which was written by some of our members and asked for like a rule change to require equal prize money for the top 3 places of both sex in all time trial events. And that got about 4,300 signatures. We had like hundreds of event organisers, thousands of CTT competitors, time trialists, etc. And some like big names like Olympic champions and sort of national champions on there too. I guess just to backtrack really briefly, I know that this might have quite a diverse audience. So a time trial is just like a bike race against the clock. They happen on like different distances all around the country, hosted by normally just bike clubs. And a hill climb is like a special breed within that, where you just race the uphill, and it feels horrendous, but it's a good time.
Yeah, and I think also important to add that it's an amateur scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
But a very, very active amateur scene in the UK specifically. There's a time trial, multiple time trials every weekend, usually. So you wrote this open letter to Cycling Time Trials, which is the governing body for these sort of events. And as part of that process of writing this letter of why change is needed, what were the counter arguments? What are the barriers in your way why change hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think loads. There are loads of reasons why it's not happened yet, and it's something that I personally have spent a lot of time thinking about. I wrote some articles this year for like different cycling media, and one of my favorite things to do is like stalk all the comments on every forum to see what people have to say about what I have to say. And so then I grouped together all the reasons why people thought we were wrong and tried to say why we're not wrong. And I think fundamentally, I think it comes down to this kind of like cycling historically has been like a male default sport, and that's completely true of time trials and hill climbs. Like women didn't even compete at the National Hill Climb until 1998. So it's like, wow, it's been incredibly slow to change so far. So, and like change takes time. So I think it's kind of that process has been really slow, but now we're getting this kind of women's participation is rocketing, and people are kind of raising their voices and saying this isn't okay anymore. But I guess to come back to your question, one of the things people like to say is that like we shouldn't give women equal prizes because there's less women competing, or like phrased as like, oh, I've seen events with equal prizes but not an equal number of women or few women there. And I think that one's tricky because like on the surface it sounds kind of rational. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, there's very few women, but I think you kind of have to think about like why we're asking for this change, and it's about equality. It's not about like proportionality. No one enters a bike event thinking like, oh, I'm going to get X proportion of my entry fee back. And fundamentally, like your average racer is always subsidizing the super fast racers anyway. if you look at it like that. And it's a question of like £10, £20, £5. It's like really not
Exactly.
it's not major, but like the
money.
symbol that it shows is, and like the knock-on effects are too, because if you give like a women's podium, then you give those women like a brown envelope with their £10 in it. You probably take a picture of them. Then when you do your event write-up, you mention them, they share their pictures on social media, and it's this whole like, it's kind of like Jenni's like role models. Like then you see someone you know who's like won a prize, and it says to you like, oh yeah, women, this is a space for women, women are valid here, women are celebrated, and like maybe this is something I can get involved with.
Yeah. It's a symbol of anything that we're valued,
Yeah,
and also how you're going to change the numbers in terms of women participating if you're sending out these messages. So when the letter was submitted, I understand you're still waiting an answer to that. In the meantime, what else is Epic doing?
Yeah, so I mean, we didn't get the response we ideally wanted to the letter, but I think like the governing body, to be fair to them, are making pretty big steps to like have a look at what they're doing and what they can do more of. In the meantime, it's kind of spurred us on to like be more ambitious and take stuff into our own hands. And we had this really awesome idea from which we've launched it today, from a woman called Michelle Lee, who races for PDQ, and it's a kite mark for equality in competitive cycling events. So it's essentially just a list of criteria that add up to equal prizes and equal recognition, and then clubs or organisers, events sign up to it, use the image on their like promotional materials, their result sheets, everything, and then we can list that on our website, and it just means like we can really celebrate the clubs that get this right already, because there are so many doing an awesome job, and then we can hopefully like inspire other events to use it. We've tried to make it really versatile, so like the idea came from time trials, but you could use this for any competitive cycling event.
Yeah, so Kingston Wheelers, get your kite mark.
Yeah, it would look great with Kingston Wheelers logo.
We got to, it's available now. We've got the equal prize money, equal entries. So yeah, I'm sure the club will be happy to fly the kite mark on it. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Alice?
Yeah, I think one thing for me really personally is just like, this is really exhausting. Like constantly arguing for your worth in a sport is really tiring. And I came from a background of like team sports, and where like, you know, your place was there, you were valued, it was totally a thing. So I think it's just worth remembering that when there are like discussions and kind of arguments happening around this, is in any kind of argument or discussion where you're like, your kind of worth and contribution to a sport is on the line, like it's always going to be more, take a greater toll on you than on the other person, or the person that's just like pursuing it for an academic exercise. So when I'm like, look, I'm worth £5, and someone's like, no, not ready, that's not a proportion, like it's not great.
Yeah, it's a bit like what Jenni was saying. This is work, you know, it's an investment of your time, your effort, but also your emotion. And
but also like, I would way rather it was me and like the Epic team that put ourselves through this now, and like hopefully make a really great lasting change, and then like the next generation don't have to. And that's really like, as a group we've talked about that, and that's really what we're for. We're like, for the next generation, the future cyclists, the girls like learning to ride their bikes now, and we really hope that we can make a change for them.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alice.
No worries.
We're going to move over to our next speaker, which is Helen Bridgman. do a little bit of an introduction about you, Helen. She started riding with Kingston Wheelers. Sadly, we lost her, but she's always welcome back. She's currently racing for 1904, which is a women's only race team. Predominantly racing crits and road races, including the regional and the national series. Importantly, she's also the co-chair of the London Women's Racing, which is an initiative that's been going for a number of years. Effectively, it's a league of crits and road races on the one hand, but also time trials, where women can compete in a series of races where there's healthy competition between the different categories as well. So you're not just competing against the elites or the Cat 1s, but you're competing within your own category across the season. And importantly, prior to that, it's about getting women to pin on the number in the first place. So London Women Racing organises skills training for racing as well. Helen used to be a marketing professional for a big global law firm, decided to chuck it all in and focus on her passion instead, which is cycling. She's nearly ready to launch her cycling coaching business. But the big thing, what we're talking about here tonight, is in 2019, she joined the InternationElles to ride one day ahead of the Tour de France to raise awareness of gender equality in cycling. Now, for me, it's I know what the InternationElles is, and I know what you did. But maybe for listeners who don't know, do you want to give a brief introduction of what is the InternationElles, what did you do, but most importantly, what was your personal motivation to get involved?
Absolutely, thanks, Jazz, and it's really great to have the opportunity to be on this fantastic panel this evening, so thank you. The InternationElles basically came about off the back of a French initiative that has been running since 2014, a team called Donnons des Ailes Vélo, who have been riding a day ahead of the pro men's race, the Tour de France, since then, to sort of promote the fact that there is no female equivalent of the race, and also that there are massive inequalities in cycling at a professional level and also all the way down to grassroots level, because they also, have a cycling club and a racing team as well in France. So, I heard about them through social media, the power of social media, and was really inspired by what they were doing. And in 2019, we created an international team, sort of non-French speaking team, perhaps you might want to call it, although some of us speak a little French, to ride with Donnons des Ailes Vélo and just, boost the message, get it out wider, and really campaign and advocate for equality within cycling, and show that women can ride the Tour. We all know our bodies are amazing. We are capable of whatever we want to do. Nobody should be able to tell us we're not. We can just do it anyway. But that there should be equality. So I've always been sort of sporty, but I came to cycling quite late, about 8 years ago now, and really enjoyed it, but really kind of found a love for it when I started racing myself in 2016. And I, as well as finding that love for it, I also discovered that there were these huge inequalities at grassroots level. I was kind of shocked, actually, why, just because I'm a woman, why aren't there races for me to enter, or local races for me to enter? Why do I have to race with elite riders when I'm only a fourth cat, for example? So I was always kind of campaigning. When I was part of the Kingston Wheelers, I was always trying to get my female club mates along to races to come and race with me. And really I enjoyed it. Why shouldn't they enjoy it? So I've always been encouraging others to kind of participate. sort of striving for changes. So when the opportunity came about to join the InternationElles, I jumped at the chance. This was really at the heart of me and what I stand for, and I really wanted to do something that might make a bit of a difference. So what we actually did, we formed a team of 10 amateur cyclists, all slightly crazy, all with a love of cycling, and all who wanted to promote the issue of inequalities in cycling. And we basically took on the exact same stages of the tour as the men did, just the day before, under very different conditions. We were self-funded. We had no mechanics and masseurs and team buses, and we didn't even stay in hotels. So we didn't make it easy for ourselves, but we took on the challenge, and along the way we were amazed by kind of what happened, really, I guess, because we sort of seemed to capture the imagination of a lot of people, not just within cycling. This was the thing that sort of amazed us. It was also sort of in the wider world. So we were able to kind of bring the message about the fact that there is great disparity in cycling to, breakfast television in the UK, to national radio in the United States, to national television in Australia. I mean, it was, we were totally blown away by it. And it was just fantastic. And because we weren't sort of linked to, not professional cyclists, not linked to a team, not kind of bound by anything, we were quite free to sort of talk about it and campaign as we would wish, albeit we weren't actually allowed to say the words Tour de France or the word etape or stage, or the ASO might have sued us, apparently. So there were a few weird restrictions, but it was great. We discovered, actually, because we were so involved, we forget sometimes we're so involved in the world of cycling that those outside of the world of cycling, don't really know what's going on. They know that there is a Tour de France. Everyone's kind of heard of the Tour de France, even if they don't own a bike, but most people assume that there is a women's tour, that they just don't see it on telly because women's sport isn't televised. Nobody watches women's sport. How many times have we heard that? And so when they actually discovered that, actually, no, it's a one-day race, there's not as much TV coverage, that the prizes were unequal, all this sort of stuff, people were kind of up in arms about it. I think you touch a bit of a nerve when you talk about equality with people generally. And I think in 2019 as well, riding off the back of the success of the Women's Football World Cup, people were really getting behind women's sport and wanting to see more of it on telly. And I think that's kind of growing all the time. So yeah, it was great. It was fantastic to get that opportunity to spread the message.
Now, at the personal level, I think it's fair to say, in a way, it's been life-changing for you. As a result of that, you've done some soul searching, and definitely said, this is not a sabbatical anymore. I don't even want to come back. And you're now ready to go into a whole different career path. And then if we look at the impact of what you did, at face value, people might think, the InternationElles is demanding for there to be a Tour de France for women, exactly of the same length, etc., as for men. But that's perhaps a bit too simplistic. I think we look at the overall impact of what you described in terms of the way you were able to catch, people's imagination and inspire people, just showing that ordinary women, you were extraordinary, sorry, but in a way you were.
No, we are. We're all, total amateurs. Total amateurs.
And you're reaching a different media as well. We're talking BBC breakfast TV, talking about cycling, and bringing up the issue of gender equality. So going forward, what do you see at perhaps at the individual level? What can we all do as individuals to bring out small change for more equality in women's cycling?
I think because one of the things that is frustrating is we don't all have the power. We're not all in a position of power where we can make change directly. And we'd also sometimes, some of us don't necessarily have the knowledge that some of those in power have. However, we can all speak up. We all have a voice. We can all make that voice heard. We can all work together. You know, you're hearing this evening about initiatives that are already happening, that are already making changes. You know, be part of those, get involved in those. As Alice and Jenni say, it's work, it's hard work. People are dedicating their free time to do these things. So support them. What can you do to help? How can you share their stories and get more people involved? You know, there's so much great work going on, so much campaigning going on at the moment. You know, there's a lot of noise going on as well, obviously at the professional level, which is fantastic. And there are things that everyone can do to sort of support that. You know, if you want to watch women's sport on TV, then ask for it. You know, speak up. If it's on TV, watch it. If there are brands supporting it, support those brands. You know, there are lots of things that we can all do in our sort of daily lives to help support and be an advocate and be an ally. And you know, that can make a change. And also, even if it's literally like taking another person along on a ride with you, somebody who, you know, is new to cycling, who isn't sure if it's for them for whatever reason, you know, take that woman out, show her how amazing cycling is and how it can change her life. Because I think, as Jenni said straight off, it's changed all our lives. You know, it's we're passionate about it. That's why we're here. That's why we're calling for change. Let's share that passion and spread that joy with each other. Because, you know, and do something different as well. If you'd have asked me, you know, when the opportunity to ride the tour came about, and I said yes straight away. You know, I didn't think, oh my God, can I do this? I didn't even know how far. You know, I knew it was 21 days, but I didn't know how far it was. I didn't know how many mountains we were going to have to climb, how many 1,000 meters, etc. If I'd sat back and thought about it, I would have, you know, said no, I can't do that, no way. But, and you know, even sort of as we set off on the first morning, we had no idea. None of us had any idea. We worked, you know, we trained hard, we worked hard, we prepared as best we could, but we had no idea if we would reach Paris in one piece. And, you know, we all struggled on different days. Not going to lie, there were tears, there were tantrums, there were, you know, there was a lot of pain, but there was also some amazing moments, and we all supported each other through it. And you know, it was life-changing, no doubt, on a personal level. But you know, dream big, because if you dare to dream big and just go for it, give it a go.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. I'm going to move over to Tiffany. Let me just see if I can get you back in. Yeah, there you are. Let me introduce you to Tiffany Fletcher. It's a mouthful, but she's the talent development coach at British Cycling, specifically the female lead. So what this means is that for all the 13 to 16-year-old girls who are selected for the talent development program, she's specifically applying what she calls a female lens to their training activities. And she'll expand on that in a moment, what that means. She's also a coach for her local club, which deserves a bit of a shout out too, which is Cycle Derby CC. And she races her bike too, not at the moment, I think, but I've seen some impressive results both on the track, the road, and also some cyclocross results there too. Tiffany was appointed in autumn of last year. This role was specifically created for you, and the reason why you applied for it is because you're really passionate about breaking down barriers for girls to enter, to progress, to thrive, and also to remain in the sport. So my first question to you is then, what are some of those barriers?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, and yeah, it's a pleasure to sort of be here with these amazing women. But yeah, I, like you said, it was appointed in October. It was a new role that was developed. So one of the first things was like, right, what is stopping youth females sort of progressing and sort of getting into the sport? So one of the first, there was sort of three main headings that I came up with. It was sort of gender imbalance, bit of motivation, and sort of social pressures. So going into more detail on them, so sort of gender imbalance, things like, as Helen just mentioned, that lack of media coverage in female sport, it's so huge. And I always mention the Tour de France, how it's a 3-day stage race. The women's equivalent is La Course, which is 1 day. And it's like, how is that fair? Like, that's just completely not. But then it's the same going forward when it comes to the media coverage. They might do similar races, like Strade Bianchi, for example. They do a similar race, but the coverage on TV is so much shorter. You get like an hour for the females, whereas it's like 4 hours for the men's. So yeah, that is one of the main things that with sort of that gender imbalance, is the coverage that's broadcasted, and hopefully that is, a lot of these things are changing, but it's a slow process. But I feel like it's a good start, and having these conversations definitely helps with that. But then the second one for gender imbalance is that lack of opportunity. I always say, when I was sort of a couple of years ago, when I was starting out racing, we didn't have female only races. You just got chucked in with the men, and they were like, yeah, that's the race, go on, off you go. And I'd be like, this is so hard. And I just thought that was cycling. I just thought this is a really hard sport. I don't know why I stuck around. Maybe it was just the love of it. But yeah, it just felt really hard. And it's like, then female racing came about, and female specific and female only racing, and just gave us that opportunity. And that has massively improved now, because there are so many more female only races. So yeah, I spoke to someone today about it, and I feel like there's going to be a massive boom in female cycling, of youth talent coming up, but also the coverage of it is getting like a lot better. So yeah, hopefully that one of those barriers is sort of getting defeated there. The next one, moving on to sort of motivation, I think females tend to have a bit of a lower self-esteem just naturally. We're just not like built like brick horses. We do have lower self-esteem, we're less confident. Cycling kit is not the most flattering, no matter how you look. So females tend to not want to put cycling kit on, especially at youth age. They tend to be more self-conscious about what they look like. I think there's a lack of, I say lack of role models, but I think lack of relatable role models. So when I talk about youth riders, they're sort of 13 to 16-year-olds. So they're looking at the pros and thinking, that's a long way off. Whereas they need to be looking at more relatable at sort of 18 years old, more junior riders, and trying to closen that net and make it more relatable for the youth riders coming through, and see the process and see how they can get to that next stage. And sort of lack of encouragement as well. I think especially a youth, they can't drive, they can't pay for the entry fees, they're not sort of self-funded, they can't do everything themselves. They need that encouragement from home and that backing from home. And if you're not from a cycling family, that can be massively harder. It's such a struggle if you're not from that background and they don't understand it as much. So yeah, especially at youth, you need that encouragement from home. And then the final sort of barrier, social pressures. So I know in females, friends and sort of peers might be inactive. There's some sort of stat that when you get to 14, about half as many girls are active as lads. And it's just like, wow, to think that all these girls are just not doing any sport, anything in particular. So that pressure on the girls that are cycling when they go and see their friends, and it's like, oh, do you want to come out tonight? Oh no, I'm going to do a training session. And they're like, why? Like, why are you doing that? And it just sort of puts them off. I think also a lot of girls tend to have a bit of a negative attitude towards PE at school, which then means towards sport in general. They think, oh, I don't want to do that. I know I did. When I was at school, it was either netball or rugby. And if you didn't do netball or rugby, you weren't a sporty child. Whereas I was quite sporty at school, but it wasn't recognised. I was sort of quietly in the corner doing my cycling and getting on with it. But yeah, I think sort of that negative attitude towards sport in general develops from school. I think other sports are also quite a big pressure at the moment. So I know during lockdown, TikTok became really popular, so it went viral. So that made dance really popular. Everyone wanted to know the next dance and the next thing that was coming on. So that sort of pushed off from other sports, and everyone wanted to take up dance. But yeah, that's another sort of pressure in there as well.
So yeah, multiple areas there. I think one of the things you said there had also tied in what Jenni's saying. You know, if you're from a cultural background where cycling isn't a thing, or it's even frowned upon, why would you use a bike if you can use a car? You know, it's like you're getting access, and then having your friend asking you why you're riding your bike when you can have fun coming out with us, and date boys or whatever else is on people's minds. So it's quite a lot of areas to break down. Now, your position was specifically created only a couple of months ago, actually. But maybe it's unfair to say that British cycling had never done anything about trying to get more girls to get into cycling and to thrive and remain. So perhaps you can set out for listeners a little bit what was already in place when you came.
Yeah, British Cycling have done. They tried to sort of fight that battle, sort of with gender equality, and they have done quite a lot before I started, which sort of put me on a nice stepping stone ready to then take over. One of the first things they did was developing female only. We call them RSRs, which are Regional School of Racing. So when riders come on the pathway, they go to the RSRs, and it's sort of a development session. And we developed those riders on the program, but they did female only ones because they used to be joint, and you do male and female together. So one thing they noticed was they need to be female only sessions, and that just really helps the girls develop as individuals, gives them that confidence. They get friends in that environment, and that sort of helps with those social pressures because then their friends are in cycling. And yeah, they're not the odd one out then. They're part of a group that's all doing the same thing. They also have we also have development centres. So we run across the country, 43 development centres all around the country. And I think what's so great about that is that they're all over. So that pressure of not having the opportunity, there's plenty for them to get to. Sometimes the worry is that if it's too far, the parents aren't going to drive them there because they need that commitment from home. So they've set up plenty of development centres, so they should be it's hard to get them everywhere, but they should be fairly local to where the riders are based. So that's sort of trying to stop that barrier there. We set up sort of female coaches and network areas. So a lot of the RSRs, the females, have female coaches on them to give the riders that sort of safe space and that role model to look at, and sort of that to try and get rid of all of those negative stigmas around that sort of side of it, and give them someone to look towards and sort of look up to. So like you mentioned, they appointed me, so they had my role. So they noticed that there was a problem. Basically, they identified that, and in October of last year, they appointed me, which, well, for me, it was brilliant. I loved it. I was doing something that I enjoyed. But I think that is a massive step forward for the role model point of view, but also for the girls to have someone to speak to if they ever need to. I have a really good connection with a lot of the riders, and they know that they can just speak to me about anything. So I think that's really important as well. And we decided they sort of looked at British Cycling and all the calendar planning that we do and tried not to clash with anything. And then we speak about that lack of opportunity, but we were sort of clashing with a lot of things. So they took a massive look at all the calendar, and when there was a female race, even if it was in a different discipline, they make sure that they don't clash with it, because you're trying to give the riders that opportunity, but if they might want to go to both. So yeah, then it's just sort of better calendar planning and trying to plan around different events.
Awesome. So you've been, not even half a year yet, but what have you been able to achieve in the time since you've been in position, and what do you still want to do? What's still on your wish list?
Yeah, for me it's been a couple of months, but most of that has been in lockdown, so it's been a bit strange. I don't really know what the actual job, the real world job looks like yet, but hopefully in a couple of weeks we can get back to the real world sessions. But one of the first things I sort of thought about coming into the job was social media. When you think about youth riders, they're constantly just on the phone, like scrolling, just liking things, whatever it is that they're doing, but their head's in their phone. So I think social media would be one of the best places to start with these riders. Talk about, sort of have an influencer, maybe that's a junior rider, it might be a coach, and just have like the day in the life of, and talk about what they do in a day-to-day life, so the riders can then see, oh, okay, this is what happens and this is how I get to that stage. And it just makes it easy, because sometimes people put on social media the highlights and everything that they do that's amazing, whereas if they do a day in the life of, they will do everything that they do in that day. It just makes it more personal for the youth riders. Another thing, sort of jumping on the back of like local campaigns, so things like This Girl Can, trying to get cycling more known, because one of the purposes is to improve the quality of riders, but it's also to get more riders, more females doing the sport. So whenever we have sort of local campaigns, jumping on the back of them and trying to get more females into the sport to improve that sort of opportunity, but to also to make more of a social aspect. Doing sort of Q&As is something that I thought about with the junior riders. So I call it like a bit of a buddy system, but buddying the junior and the youth riders up and just facilitating question and answers that the youth riders might have. Anything, I think we always assume that we know what riders want, but the best thing to do is to just ask them and say, right, over to you, do you have any questions, and just find out from them themselves and see what sort of stuff they might want to ask. Something that I'm quite close to setting up at the moment is club runs. So I think female specific club runs hopefully will get rolled out in the next couple of weeks. But I think this is a massive one. We're hoping to do them all across the country, so in all the different regions. And I think it will knock so many barriers out. It gives them that opportunity. It increases that motivation, increases their sort of self-esteem, all of those pressures. And it also, they can talk on a club run. They can just go and see their friends and have a nice conversation, but still training at the same time, which I don't think they'll even realise that they're riding a bike, because they're just having fun and enjoying it. So that's one of the main things. And then in a normal year, we would normally run 4 circuit RSRs and 5 track RSRs. Obviously this year has been a little bit different because we haven't been able to run anything to start this year so far. But in a normal year, we would give all the riders those opportunities. But we're also setting up a bit of a talent transfer. So from BMX, for example, riders that have shown really good strength in BMX could transfer over to track or road, whatever it might be. And we're doing sort of some testing with the riders and then giving them that opportunity. So getting them on the track and yeah, just sort of seeing how they get on with that.
Awesome. And then, of course, in lockdown, you've been using the virtual training platforms. So is there also a transition there? Are you looking at how people are performing in the virtual world and maybe almost identifying them and picking them up from there, bring them into your programs, or is that still a step too far?
Yeah, so we make selections in September and then it's sort of for the year, so we don't really bring many on during unless sort of exceptional. I think also it's quite hard we have been doing a lot of Zwift sessions during lockdown just to keep the riders engaged and that social aspect, seeing their friends on the screen, but it's quite hard to judge sort of results on Zwift because you don't know how trustworthy the riders are, whether they're putting the right details in, whether they are doing those watts per kilo that it says on the screen. So we're just using it as a training aspect and just a place for them to sort of get together. And then when we come to the real world sessions, that's when hopefully they've been training and using it properly, and then we'll see them again. And that sort of transition, we're conscious that they're going to be on Zwift for so long that now we're getting back to the real world sessions. We're hoping that we're sort of trying to knock it down a bit and trying not to have as much on Zwift and get them back into the real world.
Well, I think that getting back into the real world will be a challenge for all of us to get accustomed to life after COVID again. But yeah, awesome what you're doing, and good luck with all the changes you still want to introduce.
Thank you.
I'm just going to move on to our last speaker of this evening. Thank you for patiently waiting your turn. But final speaker, some of you need no introduction whatsoever, but nonetheless, I think there's a lot to introduce here. So Ashleigh Moolman, Pasio, is South African, married to an Italian. Have I got that correct?
Well, he's born in South Africa, but he has Italian heritage.
Okay, mixed heritage of South Africa and Italy. Sorry, you got a degree, which is actually quite a common thing in the female peloton, more so than the male peloton. You got a degree in chemical engineering, which perhaps also is quite a male-dominated field. You're also a businesswoman. You're running Coca-Cola Cycling, which is cycling accommodation, bike hire, guidance. But on a day-to-day professional level, you're riding for Team SD Works. You've been six-time, I got that correct? Six-time national champion of South Africa on the road.
Yes.
And double Olympian as well. And I probably don't do it justice by only picking up on the fact that you won the first ever Esports World Championships, because there's loads of wins that you've had on the road as well. But that's definitely something that we'll talk about a little bit more tonight. One of the main reasons why we're so happy to have you here tonight, because you're one of the women in the pro peloton who doesn't only stand out for the results on the bike, but also stands out for speaking up and for having a vision of what women's cycling could be and how we can change that status quo. You've been a pro for over 10 years now, is that correct? So in those 10 years, how has your vision changed for women's cycling, and what do you currently see as the most sort of pressing issues to achieve more equality?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and really great to be here this evening. Yeah, so it was quite interesting, coming from actually studying a degree in chemical engineering, which is a very male-dominated degree. I was brought up in an environment where I was treated equally to my male family members, or for example, even in the engineering class, I might have been a minority, but I was still treated equally by my male colleagues, and we used to work together often to finish projects and stuff like that. And I discovered my talent for cycling while I was studying. And so as soon as I completed my degree, I came over to Europe to pursue a career in professional cycling. And it was quite a shock to realize the disparity at that point. And I suppose the way my vision has changed, I mean, women's cycling has progressed a lot over the 10 years that I've been involved. But what has changed in terms of my vision as such is that it used to be hugely frustrating for me, this disparity, and the frustration is never something that's super productive, so I'd get myself in this position where I felt like I was hitting my head against a brick wall, and so my mentality or attitude had to change over the years to instead of being frustrated by it and feeling as though I'm a victim, to sort of changing my mentality and sort of thinking, well, how can I positively influence change? So how can I lead by example? Because that's more productive and just makes me feel better in general. But yeah, I mean, what has changed is that, women's cycling has definitely evolved. In the first years that I was involved in women's cycling, you didn't see any team buses or even camper vans, in general, teams were smaller, running on a much less budget. There was a big jump in performance level because, you know, you'd have a huge combination of girls holding part-time jobs who are racing full-time as a pro, but then some who had the luxury of being able to be full-time pro. So what has changed is that the depth in the women's peloton has definitely improved and grown. You know, the professionalism of the teams has improved. So now, you know, there are a couple of teams with team buses, and at least all of the World Tour teams have a camper van, for example. So those are small things that have changed, but they make a big difference. The level of our equipment is also, you know, totally on par. Well, not all teams, but most of the top teams, you know, we get the same quality of equipment and support as the men. So things have definitely evolved. But I think the sort of frustration is that the exposure hasn't grown as fast as obviously we would like, because I would say that is the biggest issue for women's cycling at the moment, is that we need consistent exposure of women's racing. So although the UCI has now made it a rule that to be a World Tour race, you have to have, I think it is half an hour at least live. You know, the problem is that, you know, one race you might have 2 hours or 3 hours live, and it might be streamed on Facebook, and then the next race could be only 30 minutes and it's on Eurosport. So a good thing that has happened this year is that most of the World Tour races are on Eurosport, if not all, Eurosport and GCN, because they've really stepped up in terms of pushing women's cycling forward. But once again, it was raised earlier today, you know, some races we only get 30 minutes of live exposures, you know, so the full story is not being told. And so for me, it's consistent, good exposure that is necessary to really push the sport forward, because in order to grow a proper fan base, you know, our fans need to know where they can find us, and they need to see the stories being told to be engaged in our sport. So yeah, I mean, progress is happening, but unfortunately not as fast as we would like it to.
Yeah, I agree with that, creating the fan base. Just to link you here to Helen, she's one of those women who she watches any women's cycling she can get her hands on. So she's constantly tweeting about, you know, GCN is broadcasting this, or watch on Eurosport for that, or even the results. And she's kind of my portal into the races. But it involves a search, and you're right. There's no consistency of where you can watch it and how much you can watch it.
Well, thank you, Helen. Because, and exactly as Helen pointed out earlier, you know, it really is important for more and more people, and, you know, in particular women, of course, would make a big difference to be talking about these issues, you know, and so for example, Helen and the international doing the women's the Tour de France, not the women's Tour de France, wish there was one, but hopefully it's coming soon.
One day.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's great that it makes, you know, free-to-air TV, you know, or breakfast news and stuff like that, because the big issue often is that people just don't understand, or they don't really know the big disparities that exist. So exactly as you said, everyone kind of just, or the average person might just assume, yeah, of course we have a Tour de France, it's just not on TV, but that's not true. So the more you know, the issues are spoken about, and the more awareness, the better it is for the sport. And I've definitely seen a huge surge in this awareness over the last year, I'd say. And I think COVID is possibly been good for women's cycling in that regard. And esports has played an important role, for example, in putting women's cycling on the TV. Of course, we'd like real life cycling to get as much exposure as well, but at least it's brought women's cycling to the attention of more people. And it was really encouraging to see the fans actively engaging in raising money to equal the Strade Bianche prize money, for example. So, you know, all of these efforts are very much appreciated by the women's peloton, and it makes a big difference.
Talking about differences, perhaps one of the differences that stand out in terms of the inequality of coverage on the road currently and the greater equality that we're seeing with the Zwift races. If we look at your win of the first World Championships that organised by the UCI, the Esports World Championships, what was it actually that that made that so much more equal than what we're seeing on the road?
So the reality is that Zwift from the very beginning have made equality a huge objective for them. So as soon as so the lockdown happened, of course, lots of stuff was moving into the virtual world. For example, I was not a fan of training on an indoor trainer. If I could avoid it, I did. But I was caught up in Spain with a really hard lockdown, and the only option was to train on the indoor trainer. And so that's when, I had no other option but to try to embrace it. And that's just the sort of person that I am. Instead of, I had choices to make. I could either, sit down on the couch and feel sorry for myself, or I could just do my best to make the most with what I had. And so I was very lucky to have a really good Zwift setup because Zwift had actually stayed at Rock Cycling at the end of 2018. And that's when I was first exposed to it. And so, I jumped on, and the first week was really tough because indoor training is harder than training outdoors. It's a different stimulus on your muscles and your body works harder, and it took time to adjust. And the first couple of sessions were, it was a real challenge. I couldn't hold the numbers I usually held out on the road, but luckily my coach was very supportive, and he helped me get through it by dropping my threshold power, so I could slowly get into it. And then, the more and more I engaged with the Zwift platform, the more and more, the world opened up to me, during COVID, so it was kind of a really strange experience, stuck in your house with no interaction with the outside world. Suddenly my training became more social than it had ever been before. Because Zwift it opens up the world. Suddenly, from my home in Spain, I could be training with friends back in South Africa, or people in America or in London. It's crazy, the reach that you could get. And I suppose maybe because I'm involved in the business world as well, and we have a cycling tourism business, maybe that also helped me to really see the potential of it. And so, I started, doing group meetups and chatting on Discord. And as I said, it was very social. And so I managed to find my way into it and to appreciate it more and more. And then the opportunity came to race on Zwift. And I have to admit, it was really intimidating at first because it was totally unknown to me. So it was just as intimidating as it was to line up on the start line of my first ever road race. That's how I kind of felt in Zwift. And at first, having watched Zwift races before, I thought, this is crazy. It's impossible, the power to weight they're holding for the length of time that they are. But I started my first Zwift race and I won it. It happened to be a really good course for me. So it finished uphill. So I think that helped. And then the bug really bit. And that's when I actually became quite actively involved in sort of, pushing, like, why aren't we racing on Zwift? There's no opportunity to race in the real world, and our sponsors aren't getting exposure, so why aren't we racing on Zwift? And so I actually got involved in a couple of conversations with Zwift, and what was really, really encouraging is just the way they prioritized women from the very beginning. And so it's all the racing that's happened on Zwift is totally equal distance, exactly the same course, the same amount of exposure, same prize money. 100% parity. And where this really made a big, big difference, or where I suppose it really, I suppose the message came out so clearly, is when it came to the Tour de France. So Zwift did a Tour for All event, which was their first event for UCI Road Pros. And then shortly after that, there was a virtual Tour de France. And this was the most mind-blowing thing for me, because in all the years that I've been involved in cycling, the Tour de France has never actually associated their name with women's cycling. So, even though we've had the Le Course race, it's never been called the Women's Tour de France. It's Le Course by the Tour de France. And Le Course had never actually been advertised on any of the mainstream Tour de France channels either. So you'd never see the Twitter page for the Tour de France tweeting about Le Course. So although it was fantastic that we had this one-day race and that it got good TV exposure, not many people really knew about it. So even the fans watching on the sideline, we'd often have this experience that they were totally surprised to see a women's race because they knew nothing about it. And so for the first time ever, the Tour de France name was actually associated with women's cycling. And we had 100% equality. So as I described, same distance, same course, same TV exposure. There wasn't any prize money involved with the virtual Tour de France, but it was 100% parity. And this really stood out to me when, unfortunately, at the time it took place, it wasn't really suitable for my training program to do the entire event. So I prioritized the Queen stage, which was a hilltop finish, and I won it. And the next day I went for a ride, because now it had opened up in Spain. I went out for a ride in the real world, and I happened to pass through Girona because I don't live actually in the center of Girona. And we stopped at a shop to get something to drink. And my husband sort of mentioned to me, do you notice the people sitting at the table next to you are pointing and looking at you? And I said, well, no, I don't, because it's not something I was really used to. And he's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's because of the Tour de France stage. And then we were exiting Girona on the road, and a car sort of pulled up next to us. And I was like, yeah, I was a bit off, put off by what's happening. Are they cross with us because we're cycling two abreast? And next thing, a camera came out the window, to take a photo or whatever it was. And this was totally strange to me because, I hadn't really experienced, this kind of attention from, people on the road before. And that was just an eye-opener, that the Tour de France and that kind of mainstream media exposure makes such a huge difference, and that's what women's cycling has been lacking for so many years. And then, of course, with the UCI World Championships on Zwift, of course, it was, it wasn't hard for me to make the decision that I wanted to race because, I felt kind of quite proud of the way that I'd managed to embrace, this virtual world during a very challenging year and to turn something that was really challenging into an opportunity and into something positive. So for me, it made absolute sense to race the event, and I was highly motivated to win it. And once again, equal prize money, equal exposure, equal distance, absolutely the same route. It was the first time that women's cycling had ever experienced this kind of equality.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's been an eye-opener for UCI and the ASO as well? Do you think it will rub off this 100% parity in any way on the road, having experienced that sort of response in the virtual world?
I definitely think so. So I think that the big reason why Eurosport and GCN have jumped onto broadcasting women's cycling is because they've seen the broadcast numbers, and it makes sense, the numbers were really good. And then I also think that it's opened the eyes of the ASO as well. So the ASO in the past have been very much against doing a women's Tour de France because they're very, it's all about money for them. So unless they're going to make profit out of putting on a women's event, they weren't willing to do it. And so I think that's also changed as a result of the virtual Tour de France. And again, the numbers from the exposure of the virtual racing. So yes, the ASO are going to do a women's Tour de France in 2022. That's 100% confirmed. Hasn't been announced yet what the exact details of it are. It's not going to be a 3-week stage race, but it will be 8 days. So I think that's a good starting point. And I was involved in a call actually with the ASO, where I heard from their very own mouths, that it is going to happen, and that they're really putting in a lot of effort to make sure that they're not going to do a half job. They want to do a proper job. So I definitely believe that the esports and virtual cycling has played a huge role in opening up the eyes of many people.
Yeah, fantastic. Just then look back from 10 years ago when you entered the professional sport to now being able to look forward to an 8-day Tour de France for women in 2022. Thank you very much, Ashleigh. I'm gonna open up the floor to some of the Q&A that's been coming in, if that's okay. Before I do so, I've given everyone a space to plug things. Do you want to leave a plug for Rocacorba Cycling, perhaps? Where can people find details?
Yeah, thank you. Rocacorba Cycling is a cycling tourism business just outside of Girona, so actually closer to the town of Banyoles and literally at the base of the Rocacorba climb. So that's where we got our name. And yeah, it's quite a unique Catalan estate. So it consists of 3 different villas on the estate. One is like the big manor house, and then 2 stone cottages. At the moment, the stone cottages are our accommodation. So there's a 3-bedroom villa and a 5-bedroom villa. And we're in the process of planning an expansion for the main manor house, which will eventually be a 12-bedroom hotel offering. But yeah, I mean, Girona is just a fantastic place to ride your bike. The roads are just beautiful, great selection of different terrains, and yeah, the cars are very respectful, and great food and coffee shops. So it's a wonderful place to come for a holiday.
Good. I hope we can all get our vaccinations soon, and the government will allow us to travel again. So definitely sounds like a great place to come to. I've got some questions coming in here, and I think this one might be for Alice to answer. The question is, what specifically can race organizers do to encourage more women to participate in their events?
Oh, yeah, good question. I mean, it's hard. It's something that we're all grappling with, and like, no one says this is easy. I think like the tricky kind of misconception for me is that there's like this sort of queue of women ready to race, waiting to race, that just need a bit of encouragement. And I think that's not quite it. Like, there's loads of barriers. I think what race organizers can do is, like, if you're offering equal prize money, like really celebrate that, because that's like basically just shouting that you care and you're making the space for women and you're encouraging them to take part. You can also like really celebrate the women that do race. Like, even if you only get one woman show up, post her picture and be like, this woman rode a really great race, she rode this time. And like, I guess remember that women kind of race to like different times on your courses and stuff, so promote the women's course record if it's a time trial, and then like promote, like if you have a woman that rode a really great time, think about that in the context of the women's times on that course and be like, oh, this was an incredible time, this is close to the women's national record for this distance, whatever it is, even if it's just a PB for that person.
Not the usual top 10 for men and then number 1 for the woman.
Yeah, totally.
I'm at the bottom.
And I always think, like, I do think it's hard, and I think organisers have a tough job, and it's hard to put yourself out there and do things like make a junior women's prize if you've never had a junior woman enter your race. But I always kind of think, like, the best case scenario is you put that out there, someone encourages their kid to have a go, they have a great experience and they feel encouraged. The worst case scenario is no one enters and it doesn't cost you anything, but it's there written down on your start sheet and you made an effort and you made a good impression, and maybe you'll get someone next year. So yeah, shout out to all the organisers.
I think the other thing organisers can do is what Tiffany mentioned, have more fine-tuning of the calendar to make sure that the races don't clash. I'm particularly talking about the road races, the integrate races. Another question actually for Alice, whilst we've got you on still. People are asking, does the kite mark, the equality kite mark, does it have a name? Where can people find out more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just called the Epic Kite Mark, and you can find it on our new website, which is epic-group.org. And we've been sort of posting that around on social media too. It's got the full list of criteria. You can sign up. We've got an email address if you've got any questions. we're so keen for people to take this on and to see it everywhere. So do get in touch.
Awesome, thank you. Got a question for Helen here, asking, will the leagues, the Women Racing League, London Racing League, will they come back this year, and when?
That's good to hear. There's people getting ready to race. Obviously, we had to adapt as well, and we put on a Zwift League, which was great fun. You know, we want, and we will probably continue with that as well, because it's proved incredibly popular, and it's sort of involved a whole new group of women that were never sort of active in racing before in London, which is brilliant. But the sort of mainstay for London women's racing is road and crit racing, and also time trials. And with the news, hopefully, I'm keeping everything crossed that we're starting to slowly but surely come out of lockdown, and that racing will start to happen. There are a few women's races appearing on the calendar, which is fantastic to see. I think at the moment we're planning to support a couple of race series that are being put on by some race organisers, because we had a committee meeting this week to look at what we can do this year. So we'll probably be promoting what some of the good races and race series that are already happening, but we definitely want to be running another league in the future, and so watch this space.
Great, thank you. I've got a question that is not specifically directed at anyone. It's an open question. But the question is, what can be done to deal with negative behavior or bias on the road? And the example here specifically is men giving patronizing comments on a climb, which you're absolutely capable of, and they certainly wouldn't make that comment to another man. So the broader question is, what can male cyclists do to encourage women in a positive, non-belittling and empowering way?
I think if you're out like riding, you're doing it because you want to, and if you're out tackling a climb, you're doing it because you want to. You don't necessarily need any encouragement. You know, you're going to get to the top, whether you have to get off and walk. So what, you will make it to the top. So there's no need to say anything in that particular scenario. There's certainly no need to put your hand on a woman, as I've had happen to me before, giving me a little push, not unless I've asked. But, in that specific scenario, I don't think you necessarily need to do anything. But, if it's more just generally encouraging women, if you've got, I remember going on my first club run and I was the only woman in the group, and the guys made me feel welcome. That was really important. If they hadn't made me feel welcome, if they dropped me and ignored me, and and I hadn't enjoyed it, I wouldn't have continued. So it's sort of small things like that definitely help.
Yeah. I think the good thing about this question is that there's awareness, women supporting other women, but equally there's men who want to do their bit to make it to achieve greater equality. And perhaps something Alice wants to comment on as well. Epic doesn't just have women, it's got men involved too.
Yeah, totally. I was just going to add, it's just about being a good ally, I think, and like talking to women and listening to them and taking what they're saying seriously, and I guess recognizing that is their lived experience, even if it's never happened to you. And I think within Epic, we're made up of men and women from all kind of forms of amateur racing, and I guess to me it speaks to how this is about women, but it's not just a women's issue. We all have women in our lives, whether we're male or female, and including women and celebrating them, if anything, makes the sport stronger and more exciting and a better place. Yeah.
And equally, I know there's a lot of men who enjoy watching women's racing. It's it's a different style. It's entertaining. It's fast. It's constantly moving. So there's a role for all of us there, I think. I don't see any other questions coming in anymore. So given that we're pretty much at 8:30 at the moment, I would like to ask everyone who's listening to at least give a virtual high five to each of our 5 amazing speakers tonight. Ashleigh, Tiffany, Jenni, Alice, and Helen, thank you very much. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing to create more equality for women in cycling. And I hope everyone who was listening that you took away some key things of what we can all do in our own individual ways to be better, more role models, support each other's initiatives, look for the women's racing that we can see, keep campaigning, and keep enjoying our cycling. Thank you very much for tonight.
Thank you.